And on to the third verse, we talk about the restoration of the gospel as Mormonism sees it and eternal life, usual gospel principles here. And of course, we hammer on that they have glorious truths. And it's interesting that the last of the verse is heeding his holy word. So again, themes of obedience. And it gets reiterated as sort of a coda and last little phrase. Pretty typical and pretty predictable as far as current theology goes. Then we have the invocation. I'm going to move right along here. We have the invocation, and then we have the next piece by the choir, I'm Trying to Be Like Jesus, by Barlow Bradford in this arrangement. Lovely, simple little arrangement. Only a couple of verses of it. I'm not going to pick it apart too much because there's really not a whole lot here other than wouldn't it be nice if the church actually believed in really what the chorus tells us here of loving each other as Jesus loves you, showing kindness in all that you do, be gentle and loving in deed and thought, for these are the things Jesus taught. And biblically speaking, that's generally true. But we don't see that carried out very often in how the church chooses to behave and how its leaders choose to behave. They're often somewhat conniving. As we've talked about in the previous sessions, there's a tendency to be litigious because they can't control everything they want to. And I fail to see the love and kindness in most of what the corporate church itself does. And I certainly have to recognize that members in and of themselves bend over backwards to try and follow almost a perfection culture. You know, in the church, we're taught that, well, we need to be as Jesus is, and Jesus was perfect. So we therefore need to be perfect. Otherwise, we can't receive the highest degree of exaltation, is what it comes down to. So people kill themselves trying to be Jesus, in other words. But why can't the church itself as an institution just start with love and being compassionate and empathetic and just being good Christians? That's kind of my general thought there. We go on to some talks. M. Russell Ballard. Um, it's theorized he was going to talk about to preach my gospel, but he complains about not being able to read the teleprompter, and he kind of wings it, I suppose, and gives some weird amalgamated accounts of the different variations of the first vision. I think he was sort of lucky to kind of dodge the bullet of the Tim Ballard fiasco and his rather implicit involvement in that, as it is turning out to be. Following him, we have Emily Bell Freeman, who's the Young Women General President, and she apparently she's a podcaster as well. She had a or has or had, I'm not sure which because I don't follow these things. The Come Follow Me podcast and Don't Miss This podcast. So she's a person of prominence in front of a camera, I suppose. She gives a story about being on a Jesus trail in Jerusalem and kind of the trial of having to do that sort of pilgrimage. And many Christians do this pilgrimage. And there's several to do. There's a number of different trails. A former pastor I worked with actually walked one of those trails, and I think it was quite a number of miles. It seemed like it took a few weeks to walk that distance that was walked there. But I think this is one of the shorter, more tourist themed visits through the Holy Land. But anyhow, she tells this story and having others help her do this Jesus trail. And she uses it as sort of a device to talk about walking in covenant relationship with Christ. So this is one of those follow the covenant path of the church sort of talks. She talks rather remarkably openly about garments and sort of their importance as she sees them. It's sort of unfortunate that a woman in that position in the church wouldn't perhaps use that platform to maybe leverage the leadership to say, you know, can we reconsider some of these things here? Because the design and materials of some of these things that you want us to wear to show our devotion end up giving us infections as women. I mean, that would be a great platform to say, you know, maybe if this is important for us to wear these, let's find them in ways that are practical and don't cause us health issues. I think that would be a very valuable position. She also makes an attempt to detransactionalize covenants to some degree and gives the good member checklist, not a surprise. And she also gives sort of passing lip service to the younger generation of being involved, even though most people realize that the age of which youth are leaving the church seems to get lower and lower, and they're leaving faster and faster. The next talk following her, Adelson de Paula Perea of the 70 brings up the name of the church and I think won the famed BKP award here. No, PBK. The PBK award. I'll get it right eventually. And so he talks about the proper name of the church, and he gives a temple open house tour story. And he also gives testimony of how the Holy Ghost will confirm things. Sort of a forgettable talk for me. After him, Quinton Cook of the 12 talked about the need to be peacemakers, which comes from Russell Nelson. No surprise. There's a lot of Nelson quotes here. And I think in Nemo's Jesus, Joe, or Russell breakdown, Jesus barely scraped out a lead over Russell Nelson. The sad thing about Quentin L. Cook's comments were in the need to be peacemakers. If the church would actually live by that, that would allow some better things to happen. But then we sort of have the struggle of, well, why does God allow bad things to happen? And you want to see the leaders of the church and maybe the church as a whole wrestle with what is a typical Christian struggle to begin with. If there is a God, why does God allow things to happen? If there is a God, why does God only get credited for good things? And then the devil, all of those sort of theological anachronisms that share two sides of a coin. But Mormonism avoids that. It creates so much cognitive dissonance trying to figure it out that we just tend to avoid it entirely in doctrine. So, of course, Quentin L. Cook starts to walk down that path of sort of struggling with those questions, and then takes the easy way out, the cop out of, well, we don't know all the answers. Well, the first thing is, well, why don't the leaders of the church have the answers? Aren't they communing? Aren't they representative? Is it only a one-sided conversation where you only get incoming texts from Jesus or God or whoever they believe they are receiving inspiration from, but they can't ask questions the other way? I find that rather disturbing if they really are representatives of the one true church of God in Christ. Anyhow, he goes on to say that prophets will guide everyone, just follow them. But sort of the irony also in his comment, or his ideas and statements towards the end of his talk was, well, prophets guide everyone, and all you have to do to be safe is follow them. There's also a recording of him, I think it was on one of the church podcasts, where he says, well, we didn't receive revelation that COVID was going to happen. So, there's the irony there is that, well, okay, we're pretending to be prophets of God and receiving all this divine inspiration, but we can't even warn the members when something serious and devastating throughout the world is going to happen. So either they are or they aren't. Which is it? I have my opinions. You may have yours. Following Cook's talk, we have the next piece by the choir, "Come Ye Children of the Lord." Actually, that's a congregational hymn. Let's just zip through that really quickly.
This is the Sunday morning session of the 193rd Semi-Annual General Conference of The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Potty break, everyone. Rush up the aisle. Funny to see them all in the big left position standing there. I just don't understand Mac Wilberg and what he's trying to do as a conductor. He's just up there beating time. He's missing out on so many opportunities to actually do something interesting musically and give some character and shape and direction, but he's just up there flapping away. I'm not even sure he's enjoying it. He's just kind of going through the motions. I'm not going to talk too much about this hymn, other than the third verse kind of catches my attention, where it talks about everyone being arrayed in spotless white and dwell mid truth and light. There's sort of a temple theme there. Moving right along, after this hymn, we go into Dieter Uchtdorf of the 12. He talks about the prodigal and the road that leads home. He gave a tangential and very, I would say, couched, almost veiled sort of shout out to the LGBTQ community and talking about acceptance of those who sort of leave and go to live in a like-minded community. In the end, it was a comeback to church talk. Not a whole lot there. I know a lot of people had high hopes for him of sort of leading the church in a new direction, but with Russell Nelson's crowning to the throne, he lost that opportunity. So now it's to others to carry that torch. And really, the only way that's going to happen is if the members start reclaiming their voice and their power, and not continuing the status quo. The church will never change if people just go along with the way it is. And that's sort of the fear, and it's a sad thing. Next up was W. Christopher Waddell, the first council of the presiding bishopric. And he's the one that made the face of the news and sort of trying to cover up the church's illegalities with the, was it the Federal Exchange Commission, FEC? Whoever it was that fined them after it was discovered they were hiding a couple $100 billion, well, 130 something, whatever the actual number is. They had all these shell companies. They were hiding hundreds of billions of dollars amongst them, trying to give the illusion that these are different things spread around the church, all fake, all illegal. And of course, the church got slapped, not nearly as hard as they should have, in my opinion. But Waddell, or is it Waddle? Oh, whatever. It's interesting. Again, I keep saying that nothing in the church happens by accident, and that seems to be true even of leadership appointments. So even though he's the first council in the presiding bishopric, he was, and maybe is, probably was, because it seems you have to give up your job once you join the upper echelon. He was a vice president of investments at Merrill Lynch. So there's no surprises here. People are appointed to their positions because they have some knowledge of what their calling entails. It's not ironic. It's purposeful, and I'm sure he was put there because of his professional involvement. He would be able to steer the church and its investment arm, which I'm not sure if I'm totally convinced it was held from the Quorum of the 12, but maybe it was, because none of those men seem to necessarily trust each other. They're all just kind of out for whoever can get the brass ring first. It's too bad. But his talk goes on. He gives essentially the don't follow Tim Ballard talk. And he talks about don't worship the heroes, don't worship vloggers and bloggers and influencers or politicians. But he of course, because it's the church, make sure you revere the church leaders. So, in sort of carefully shaped words, without ever mentioning Tim Ballard, we warn the leadership not to cause a schism by worshiping such people as Tim Ballard, who were doing naughty things. I don't think we need to say much more about him. Following that, we have the next arrangement, another Wilberg special, of course unpublished, Hark All Ye Nations. And this one drives me crazy. I'm not going to pretend I haven't watched this a few dozen times, but they have this clipped affect in this piece. It's very staccato, and the words are very clipped and cut, and it sounds very amateurish to me. It's not very refined. I don't know what they're going at with that stylistic approach to this particular arrangement, because there's no acoustics in the conference center. It's dead as a doornail by design to keep extraneous noise from coming forward for broadcast. And I suspect some of that design was to keep from members out in the audience from causing riots when they decide to vote opposed. Be that as it may, there's no reason to get overly punctuated in pronunciation or musical stylings in a room like this, where acoustic and reverberation have to be added digitally as part of the processing. So I don't quite understand the approach here, but it's what Wilberg wanted, and even though he doesn't conduct it that way because he's just up there beating time and giving cues once in a while, they still do it because they're that good. I keep trying to decide what the purpose of reiterating a last line is, or a single word, other than it just lets a musical idea finally wander to the end. I don't see a contextual reason lyrically to do so. Well, okay, we can just keep repeat. It's sort of like the repeat and fade from the 80s and 90s, where, well, we couldn't figure out how to develop any further, so we'll just kind of keep repeating it and slowly turn down the knob. Maybe that's what this effect is intended, but he does it a lot, and it just gets kind of tiring. And of course, he wanders through different keys through each verse. We start in the key of C, go through E, and then A flat, and then back to C when we have sort of recapitulation of the chorus. But the context here within the lyrics, the typical things, the restoration of the church. Of course, the church can't exist if there wasn't a restoration or a need for it. The gospel light of truth and love in every land today. Well, it's not in every land yet, is it? And with the decline in missionaries, it's unlikely to be so. It's, yeah, we get to some pretentiousness talking about the darkness that nations have wept, waiting for the truth of this gospel of Mormonism to come to them. It's just pretentious. It's the typical sort of Mormon arrogance of, well, we have the truth and you'll have to wait till we get to you. I don't particularly relish that thought. An interesting biographical note, at least on the text, or the writer of the text, who is Louis F. Munch. a German immigrant to the church who was apparently a noted figure in early education in Utah. I found a couple little interesting things about it. There's other names he's referenced to which have no meaning to me because I'm not from Utah, but maybe it does to people from the state. But Munch was a German immigrant. He taught at the Select School in Salt Lake, where Brigham Young's sons and daughters and only a few select others in Salt Lake City were in attendance. So this was the school for the elites that he was apparently in charge of. And it seems like the text of this hymn was originally written in German and was later translated to English and included in the current version of the hymnal to soon be replaced. I would love to know what the German text is. Not because I'm great at German and studied it in college. Beside that fact, it would be interesting to hear how it actually was meant to go in its native language. German and English don't translate or transliterate very well as a sung language, so I'd be fascinated. And I couldn't find anything on the church website that had it in the original text. So I don't know if anyone has it. Send it to me. I'm curious to see what it says. After the singing, we have Henry B. Eyring, the second counselor of the First Presidency, giving his talk on the constant companion, and he talks about the outpouring of revelation, which I've yet to see anything that's really revelatory in even these sessions. Changing the how many hours you're in church isn't exactly a revelation. That's just practical. Where this revelation is coming from or what it's about, that seems to escape everyone, including the leaders of the church. He goes on to sort of give a brief letter to his descendants, and he more or less says, "You'll be happier and safer in the church." And perhaps he's sort of realizing mortality and his age at this point, just like Nelson is. And this is sort of his peremptory goodbye speech. But he may have a couple more years left in him before he actually punches his card. After his remarks, we have the inimitable Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, as arranged by Wilberg. This thing's been running around for quite a number of years, and I find it's getting a little long in the tooth by today's standards, but some people still seem to enjoy it. It does have what was a fresh thought, and since Mack has been at the helm of the Tabernacle Choir since this was written, I think this arrangement was done when he was still at BYU. I recall saying BYU choirs, I think even with the men's chorus, doing this. That's my first recollection of this arrangement of the piece. And it may have been one of the things that sort of sold him to the tabernacle, to the leadership. In any case, it wanders through a few keys, and it's the text we would often associate with the rest of Christendom. So there's not a whole lot to say there, and it is published via Is that right? No, it's unpublished. Well, I've played it, so it's semi-published as contraband allows it. again, for those of you playing the home game, that is indeed a high C. It gets up there. Even in some of the earlier verses were pretty high for the sopranos. We wander through the key of E, through the key of G, and we just, it's interesting some of the modal devices he uses to change keys in this one. But it's a little bit of a treacherous piece because it's so exposed in the first two couple of verses between the ladies and the gentlemen, respectively. You've got to have very solid pitch, or you're sunk by the time the organ or orchestra in some cases comes in. So you've got to hang on to your own to make this one successful and as a triple shiver moment as one could hope for it to be. It's not badly constructed. I'm not going to knock back too hard for this one, but he fell into a working formula, I think, with this one and started to use it in just about everything he's arranged since. And that concludes the session. Even though the Sunday morning session ended on a literal high C, I don't want to crack the joke of the fat lady singing, but it's almost true. And okay, that's unkind. I know. They're just pleasantly plump, bless some of them. Let's not linger. Let's go right into the Sunday afternoon session. Again with the Tabernacle Choir and Murphy Wilberg sharing the podium. And they begin with For All the Saints, which is a curious choice. In the rest of the Christian world, or at least I should say the liturgical Christian world, things about saints is usually kept for All Saints or All Souls Day, which is the first part of November, typically, in which those who have gone before, the saints who have died often within the year, or those we choose to remember as saints. And I don't mean necessarily in the Catholic sense, because in some religious traditions, all participants in Christianity are considered saints. At least that's how it is in the church I go to. But the context here, Mormonism, kind of confuses me, other than it's kind of applied to the righteous Mormons who believe in the truth claims of the church, and they are the saints, because they've accepted the gospel of Joseph Smith as being the one true church. There go, they are the saints. And they will be exalted on high to the highest degree of the celestial kingdom and so forth. But I don't quite understand what they're doing with it here in this particular session of conference, because I didn't quite see a direct tie into any of the talks. It's confusing to me. At any rate, this is Mac Oberg's take on the famous Ralph Vaughan Williams Sine Nomine, or For All the Saints, in a different key and with a little bit less rigorous fervor, I think, than the original. But for whatever reason, they felt they needed to do a Wilberg version and not a different version. But in any case, this is how it goes. He's flapping away like usual. See, there's really nothing going on here. It's just beating time. Lots of good themes in the text that good members of the church would pick up on. Of note is that the second verse was omitted in this particular arrangement, and as you noticed, it doesn't change keys all the time, which is sort of refreshing. I kind of wonder why, when they decide to do congregational hymns, which of course the choir is going to participate in, why they don't do some of these types of settings that are fairly consistent. Let the congregation sing their thing with the choir that has some descants and altered harmonies, and that could really be quite an exhilarating experience for people in the audience. It happens in other churches. Why can't it happen in this one? For some reason, hymnody has gotten rather stale and boring within the Mormon church. It wasn't when I was at the organ. We got a little bit creative, but for some reason, that culture is just kind of lost on them of creative hymn playing. So we leave it to performance groups like the Tabernacle Choir to make it interesting, while the rest of the lowly folk in their wards and stakes do boring stuff that doesn't really do much. It's a wasted opportunity musically. Let's see, is there anything else in this text? Well, we could talk about, well, even for the saints of the church, there's no rest even in the eternity, so give up that idea right away. The talk of rocks and fortresses and the Lord our captain in the well fought fight. You know, Mormons like a good fight when it comes for truth and righteousness, right? So on and so forth. And the last verse really is more of a Trinitarian verse, singing to Father, Son, and Holy Ghost at the end, even. I'm not sure how much they really believe that anymore. After this first introductory piece, we have the invocation, and I scribbled some of this down because I thought it was rather pious of whomever it was that gave this particular opening prayer. I said that it's a prostration of personal piety, which I think is true. The verbiage and the vocabulary demonstrated in this particular prayer caught me with a little bit of personal amusement, and I giggled through part of it. But he started out with effulgent joy. Uh, we're gathered or something like that. And then he talks about thine anointed oracles and other leaders. And I thought, oh, you brown noser. Not only are we kissing the backsides, we're doing it with rather elevated speech. I mean, I have a college degree, but I don't use things like evoking the leadership as oracles. It was just, it tickled me. And he went on in his prayer. And of course, we heard this theme in some of the talks to be enlisted in the greatest of all causes, even the gathering of Israel, and have more urgency. And then he talked about those who are struggling to be lifted to continue on in the covenant pathway. I mean, we hit all the talking points of all the sessions. Covenant pathway, kissing up to the leaders. I mean, it's just check box after check box after check box. I wonder if it was scripted and he memorized it and just made a convincing performance. In times past, and I can't see in the picture that I've left up on the screen from the choir, but it seemed before they would also have a screen in the pulpit, even though most of the people giving talks look at the prompters sort of at the different camera angles in line with those. It seemed like they used to have screens there, so if you wanted to look like you were reading something, there it was, and it was also prompted. It was the same thing everywhere, but you could look down and look like you were being sort of ponderous and reading. I don't know if they still do that. It just kind of raised some questions of, are even the prayers sort of pre-scripted and pre-approved? I wouldn't be surprised if they are. Following the prayer, Dale G. Renlund of the Quorum of the 12 gave a rather frightening talk where he sort of explored the themes of treasure sinking and Egyptology. Not something I would necessarily squeeze into a conference talk, but there he was. He was talking about finding the treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb right beneath this camp. He also related a story of an 8-year-old who had just been baptized and nearly was hit by a car, and sort of thinking, well, I would have gone to perfected glory in the celestial kingdom had the child done so, had been hit by the car, that is. And what a tragic thought that people as young as 8 years old who are sort of led to believe they're given a choice to be baptized in the church, but really it's not, and it's an expectation. But to have the idea that, well, it's best if after I'm baptized I just end it all because it can't get any better, and anything else after that's going to be too much work, and it's sad. It's sad that this is a church of dead ends. It's just terribly tragic. He also talks about scrupulosity, or he gives reference to engaging in scrupulosity. They never address it directly, can they? And they won't, because they know they need it to perpetuate sort of the methodology of keeping people involved in the church. Let's see, scrupulosity was encouraged in indirect ways. He talked about going to the temple even if they're nearby. And he also made the rather salient point of look no further than the prophets. So once again, look only to the leadership church and of the church and look nowhere else. And that gets hammered home right at the end of the session. Following him was John C. Pingree Jr., Journal 3070, and ironically enough, the executive director of the correlation department. A number of podcasters made the comment of, why are all these talks so inconsistent? Who is falling asleep at the switch for the correlation department? And it must be this guy, because he does the same thing. He conflates a few things and gets some things mixed up and contradicts himself in his own talk, of which he did a lot of asserting of I know claims that really are more beliefs than they are actual knowledge. And he made essentially an apologist talk. He was calling out biased reporting from outside of Mormon walls and in mainstream media. But of course, the church is never biased, is it? Because, well, they think they're the truth and they're going to pretend such until they're called out otherwise. But he's just as culpable as the rest of them in hiding factual church data and skewing things so as to make the church always look favorable, if not the true church. It's dishonest and it's certainly deceptive. But it seemed he was most receptive to the. Well, he talks about being most receptive to the Spirit when one is humble. So he himself confuses the very thing of doctrine versus policy in all of his talk, and it's just sort of laughable. But after he's done expounding on his rather confusing subject matter, we have the choir singing "Tell Me the Stories of Jesus." And I actually was sort of infatuated with this arrangement by Mr. Murphy. It has a nice sort of little flowing theme, a nice little ostinato. That gets a little bit lost in the orchestral version, but it's nice and clean here with the organ. We have sort of a nice, warm 8-foot solo voice, and then the luscious strings doing what they do best. There's a nice sort of bed underneath it. think Ryan Murphy gets substantially better musical results from the choir when he's conducting. He's got so much more shape that he does, and it's not just up there beating the ictus to death like Mac Oberg does. And this is a decent setting from him. Um, Certainly it goes up a half step every time. We start in the key of B flat and then in the key of D flat. But it works, and the flowing subdivision of it carries it along really quite nicely. And the choir, particularly the guys, start off in a sort of nice sotto voce that's not too heavy, and it's got a nice color to it, sort of nice and light, and it just carries across to the next verses with the women, and so on and so forth. Of course, this tune is not indigenous to Mormonism. It actually comes from the Methodist tradition, from which there are actually a total of 6 verses, 4 of which here in this arrangement, but only 3 of which are in the children's songbook. So just sort of a nice little historical factoid there. After the choir sings, Valeria V. Cordon, who's the General 71st Counselor of the Caribbean area, or Caribbean, depending on how you pronounce it, he was given the PBK award for this session. And he went on to berate parents, more or less, and almost verbatim said, "You can't properly parent your children without us as the leaders in the church," which is sort of an insult to parents in many ways. But I suppose for those who've already kind of given over their mind and brains to bowing and saying yes to everything the leaders say, will go right along with it. What else will they do? He calls that parents should adhere to strict, controlling conservative orthodoxy. And some have made the point that his comments are to the point of fundamental extremism if carried out to their logical conclusions. And he says, or the adversary will gain a foothold. So this comes from old school conservative patriarchal, or is that the word I want? No, parochial Utah culture. Patriarchal works too, because that's equally as accurate. Just a sad shaming talk that I can't imagine how they're effective, unless people just want to be abused by leaders of the church all the time. Be that as it may, J. Kimo Esplin, General Authority 70 of the second counselor of the Asia. Let's see. J. Kimo Esplin, General Authority 70, I think second counselor of the Asia North area. He talks about the Japanese saints sacrificing a lot of their riches and homes to charter a plane to go to the temple before one was actually built in Japan, I suppose. And, it's kind of an interesting talk of, in some ways, sort of, it seems like he's advocating for a return to people just giving everything just to be low-level participants of the church. It doesn't seem like a healthy thing to reproduce these things at a time where the church is like Scrooge McDuck and rolling around their money bin of hundreds of billions of dollars. It should seem unnecessary to even relate to these stories. I mean, it's one thing to honor the commitment of the saints of old. I don't think anyone will dispute that, because many of them sacrificed innumerable things, especially if we talk in the early days of the church and traveling all the way to Utah to settle there. But in this day, it seems like it's a lost context, unless the church is demanding that people just start giving everything that they've got left to the church, and they just kind of wallow away in nothingness and obscurity and destitution, which is a disturbing thought, isn't it? Well, even with that, he more or less says, give everything to the church to demonstrate your commitment to it. It's almost a consecrative sort of talk. To cheer the mood and to lift our spirits after being beat down by these two talks, where the choir and congregation give us the hymn, Rejoice the Lord is King, where was actually at this moment when I first started reviewing some of the footage of this, where I noticed that Ryan Murphy was not wearing a ring on his finger. Either of them that I could tell. Anyhow, this is the hymn selected.
This is the Sunday afternoon session of the 193rd Semi-Annual General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And then they were so good at not checking the levels with full organ and the 32-foot reed there that we clip the audio a little bit in the broadcast. Oops. I won't fault them too much for that because, well, they can't help it. Yeah, another hymn that comes from other places, although Mormons have appropriated either way, and we associate some things with kingdoms that cannot fail and the keys of death and hell. We always try and relate that to the keys of the priesthood, which only the prophet holds. So more of the same. After this particular hymn and the leg stretch that a number of people were apparently taking to get out of there, we have Garrett W. Gong. Oh, Garrett. Oh, Garrett. And the title of his talk is somewhat ironically made, I think, um, where it was titled, I think, and it's even still on the website this way, of Love is Spoken Here. Now, of course, we can all think of that rather popular. Is it popular anymore? I'm not sure. Well, it's a tune from Primary, if I'm not mistaken, and it's in two parts. Love is Spoken Here. Is that a Janice Cat Perry? I don't remember. I don't have the books anymore sitting right here. Be that as it may, his talk seemed to be rather of trying to decode love, and he talks about love. Isn't that nice? Someone talking about love. But he goes on to try and decode some of the buzzwords of Mormonism, stake centers and opening exercises and other Mormon colloquial phrases, but they don't seem to be very commonplace anywhere else. And he talked about a story with his wife, which got a few sort of ahs and giggles. And he made a comment about women's clothes. Yet again, evidently he made a comment about women's clothes in the last session. So maybe he should stop talking about women's clothes. And that was sort of a punchline of maybe a convert or someone of that nature who came to church and wore a skirt that was too short, and rather than being offended, they made a self-deprecating joke of, well, please forgive my heart is converted, but please forgive my wardrobe while it catches up, or something to that effect, which got a few laughs out of the crowd. But it, it someone like Garrett Gong, and I didn't know this, whose son lives in this area, not too terribly far from me, so I understand. I don't know his son personally, but according to Facebook, we've got quite a few friends in common, so there may be some miraculous path where we cross and somehow meet each other. But I know Matthew lives in this area nearby, so the gay world is not very large, and it's not even in a big city where I live. It's not very large, so who knows what will happen. But talking about love when he's made the faux pas, and this was presented on Nemo's channel. This is why I reference it, where a general authority or a member of the Quorum of the 12 specifically, and you don't get much higher unless you're sitting in one of the 3 special velvet thrones, but he's made the faux pas in his own personal life of sort of alienating his gay son, and involving social media. There's a whole little story about it. Go check Nemo's channel if you want the details. But just thinking about that and how people like Gong could be better examples, but no, they have to toe the company line of the church that, well, we don't care for gay people so much because we don't know what to do with them. They're not in the plan of salvation, and we're certainly not going to put it in the proclamation on the family because it ruins all of our conservative Mormon values that us old white people, and, well, some not so white these days, who carry these conservative values, it just makes a mishmash out of things. So they'd rather not deal with it, and they just keep pushing gay people off the side when they can't legislate against them to make them as miserable as these very happy Mormons are. However, there was a glimmer of hope, and Christophe Gerard Carrier's, who's from France, if I'm not mistaken, another General Authority 70, and some people likened him to Uchtdorf. He's being like Uchtdorf and being a little bit more progressive and giving true Christianity that this particular church needs at this moment in time, and not this very narrow-minded conservative Mormonism. In other words, being more Christian and being more loving, which the church, I think, is really struggling with right now. But Carrier talks about unquestionably the most, well, my notes say that he's unquestionably the most forward-thinking, inclusive, and progressive talk in the entire conference. And this version of Christian Mormonism is most likely what will advance the church beyond its conservative shackles. And in the previous session, I sort of talked about Mormon nationalism and all that other stuff, and how the church has habitually, over the last 40 plus years, longer than I've been alive, I'm sure, of hitching its wagons to conservatives and the conservative movement so that it can have more political power. And it's done that in Proposition 8, where it sort of aligned with the Catholics and tried to quietly give money for Proposition 8 to keep gay people from getting married. And then they wanted that to become nationally enshrined by it going all the way to the Supreme Court, and they were most unhappy when they didn't win that one. And then they had the policy, the famous policy. I think it was 2015, or was it earlier than that? And it was rescinded in 2015. The one that said that any youth have to denounce their gay parents if they want to be members of the church, and they couldn't do so until they were 18, and all these other things that were going to sort of alienate and drive a wedge between non-traditional, non-Mormon families and what their sense of families should be, of a husband and a wife and a male and a female, and they're sealed in the temple. Mormons don't like things that are different, so they tried to find a way to sort of slash anyone that didn't fit that family description from their ranks, and that's what that whole policy was about. I actually didn't know about it till after it was over. That's how disconnected I was to the church. But I just shook my head in disgust, as I usually do when they do stupid things like that. And then the members sort of retaliate and lash out and say, hey, now wait a minute. And it's moments like that, ladies and gentlemen, babies and gentle thems, where the membership should see their power and how they can influence change for the better in their own church, and not just take it over the head from the leadership and get whipped into submission every time they want to just keep things far right and conservative and unchristian. After Carrier's remarks, his very lovely remarks, it was refreshing to hear someone actually being Christian in what should be a Christian church, but very often isn't. The next selection by the choir before sort of the grand finale, as it were, uh, was a curiosity to me. It's not a musical piece in Mormon canon. Consider the Lilies is not in the hymn book. It's not in the children's songs. It's not in any of the earlier supplementals. It's actually a song that was written by a person named Roger Hoffman, who is sort of an LDS artist and had some degree of notoriety, I think, in kind of in parallel with Michael McLean and people like that. I mean, he wrote a handful of songs and some albums and tried to do some recording and producing for other LDS artists in the area. But he wrote this little tune called Consider the Lilies, and it has a little bit of a biblical connection. You know, I didn't even write down what that biblical connection was. I think it's Matthew somewhere. Um, Roger Hoffman said on his website, sort of talking about this little song he had written, it's not within my power to express my gratitude to God who gave the song to me. Already we're giving God all the credit. Well, okay, if you wish. It is expressed the sum, in it is expressed the sum of his great power to redeem us all from the effects of this fallen world. He not only forgives sins, but heals the adverse effects of them on everyone who will trust him. It has been so with my life and with many, many whom I know personally. So that's kind of the personal touch of Roger Hoffman explaining his own little song. That was later rearranged by A. Lawrence Lyon, and it's published by Jackman. I'm going to point out right now that I think this is sort of the musical version of dealing with the Tim Ballard thing. Because we go through the first couple of verses, we talk about some creatures out in the wilds and how God tends to them. But on the third verse, and I'm just going to point this out right ahead of even playing it, consider the sweet, tender children who must suffer on this earth. The pains of all of them he carried from the day of his birth. It writes itself, doesn't it? I mean, we could talk about, what Tim Ballard was doing and what he claimed to be doing, and this seems to be sort of the musical representation of trying to address that situation, which, who was it, Waddell? Or, when I've forgotten who gave the Tim Ballard talk. See, this is how forgettable some of this stuff is. It bears very little impact on my life. I'm just talking about it. But it's a lovely tune, and it's a lovely setting. But let's catch a piece of that. I may or may not play the whole thing, depending on how easy it is to push all the buttons. A nice, gentle little setting there. But you could, I just thought of another context that one could take that last verse, and it's probably even more depressing, more or less telling people, don't worry about the children who are suffering. And before that starts playing, I'll hit that button again. Don't worry about the children who are suffering. Just leave it in God's hands. God will take care of the children who are suffering. So don't think about Tim Ballard and what he was trying to do. Leave it to God. So it's almost, one could see it that way. I don't know which way they meant it, but there you go. And as if by magic, the concluding speaker to great thunderous gasps, I think more than anything, no, it wasn't thunderous applause, was a pre-recorded talk from Russell M. Nelson of the church, the big cheese, the man in the central velvet throne. And of course, this was probably the most produced talk out of all of them, where he had his 2-word buzz line that's, I'm told, already appearing on merchandise being sold by the church and other places of Think Celestial. People make comments that the grammar's terrible. They're absolutely right. And he kind of goes through the arrogant motions of comparing his pain as a 90, almost 100-year-old person who suffered a rather serious fall and most likely did permanent damage that will probably conclude his life at some point in the near future. But comparing his pain and suffering to that of Jesus, and of course, Mormons don't understand some things, and they always think of the suffering of Jesus as being in the Garden of Gethsemane, because they believe that he literally bled from every pore, and it was there, bleeding from every pore. It's a misinterpretation of Scripture and misreading of it. But it was there in the garden where Jesus took upon the sins of the world and suffered so greatly that he bled through everything. Scripture says differently, that he sweated as though they were drops of blood. So, it's a misinterpretation, but they use it theologically, and they firmly believe that Jesus suffered in the garden, and what happened to Jesus on the cross and being crucified was just sort of a series of unfortunate events. So there's a minimization of what more mainstream Christianity sees as the suffering of Jesus upon the cross, even the Catholics, for heaven's sake. I mean, they have the crucifix in their church, and it's very prominent. So Mormons, for some reason, can't agree on that. And I can remember that most, at least in my time in the church, and I think it's still this way, that the cross is kind of an icky thing to Mormonism. So it's just, we don't talk about it, we shove it away. We don't even have it in reference to our buildings. We don't have it in art or any sort of iconography. We don't talk about the cross. So it's a weird thing in Mormon doctrine and theology. But Russell Nelson, of course, talked about qualifying for the richest blessings of heaven. Of course, you can't get into heaven if you don't qualify. Those who will receive a body will do so according to which of the laws of the various kingdoms of heaven they've engaged in. So if you only engage in telestial laws, you only get a telestial body, and terrestrial laws, you'll get a terrestrial body. And only those who receive celestial bodies and have acted their lives and so forth according to celestial laws will receive a fully glorified celestial body. So, as others have very rightly pointed out, this is the return of the telestial kingdom, or TK smoothie, meaning you have no genital body parts and there's nothing functional. You're just sort of a personage with limbs, I suppose. The strange things they come up with. They try and get away from it. Apparently, the idea of the TK smoothie is a generation or two ago, and it's been sort of gone until Nelson gets up and just starts rattling on to reaffirm that, well, that idea is not gone. He's resurrected it, and it's back. But perhaps the most insidious of his comments in his talk were the following. And I found it disturbing, and it caught my ears because even though I'm in an okay place with my family who are members of the church, some of which I've gone to some lengths to kind of mend some fences in the last several months and rekindle some relationships because, quite frankly, the church drove a wedge in it. We had to work out what that means for me as a gay person in my family of otherwise Mormons and extended family of very conservative Christians who are not Mormon but are conservative Christians. So within my own family dynamic, working some of those things became a little bit of a divisive issue for a number of years until we matured enough to have those conversations. But when Russell Nelson takes the seated position at the microphone, in this case, and says things like, don't take counsel from those who don't believe, that causes some big problems. It causes problems in mixed marriages of mixed belief or non-belief, as the case may be. And it's how much more of a wedge can we drive from a church that claims to be in support of families and eternal families when we're going to start alienating people who may not be believers? It's problematic. It's problematic at best. It's abusive. Well, I think most of what they say in general conference is abusive, but that's just my opinion. And then, as any good swan song of a leader of the church before they depart this earth tends to go, they hit all their bullet points: be obedient, pay your tithing, follow the church. And here's a 2-word buzz phrase for you to make memes and hashtags, because some brand expert and social media person said, we need a 2-word phrase. Can you come up with something? I'll bet they gave it to him. A man that went through what he did through physically probably isn't even thinking straight with all the painkillers and medications, and I would suspect opiates. I don't know that. It's speculation, but people that age who have falls, they don't usually live very long thereafter, if they survive them at all. So it's it's tragic. It's an unfortunate circumstance, but we have to admit at some point that age has a factor, not only in how our bodies recover, if they can recover, but also the effect of age and how our minds work. Our brains, being organic, like the rest of biology, are not going to be functioning at their best as they age. And of course, if there's any other diseases on top of that, that inhibits brain function even that much more. So to give older people in the church much more credit than having survived as long as they have, that how they are somehow giving further light and knowledge from having lived so long, is dangerous at best. As the mind ages and things become fuzzier and less clear and even less articulate in how they can explain things, it's dangerous to give one's own autonomy to a person who's less functional, and less functional in a multitude of ways, not the least of which being their mental faculties. So there's the highlight of all of the talks in conference. And after his sort of very provocative words, he makes a statement of don't take counsel from those who don't believe, pretty much towards the end of his remarks. And then the choir had the very unenviable task, as there were literal, you could hear the rustling in the audio of the broadcast of, I don't think this sat very well with a number of people. I mean, sure, the spectacle of him even making an appearance at all, which they had deliberately kept quiet throughout all of the sessions. Apparently, Russell Nelson went in Friday night and did the recording in the space in the conference center, and then they did the Saturday session, and so they knew it was coming. I mean, at least those higher up in the production chain and probably senior leadership knew it was coming. But it was sort of the grand reveal at the end. I don't know. It seems like unnecessary drama. If he's going to speak, just tell people he's going to speak, and they'll go, "Oh, thank heaven, our prophet's speaking." But they had to sort of keep it under wraps and spring it on the membership at the last second, and have this sort of almost Wizard of Oz moment. He appears on the screen and gives his rather condescending message of doom and gloom and sad heaven, for lack of better words, and it says, "Be obedient, pay your tithing, and peace out, folks." And then the choir has to follow that up with, "Teach me to walk in the light." And I don't envy them. They probably had to sing through all this rustling around of people being uneasy and going, what just happened here? But they do it nonetheless, and more power to them for having done so. And evidently that first appeared in the children's book. Well, I think of the children's book. At any rate, the copyright on that was first held in the 1950s. So that one's been around a little while, at least the original song. And of course, this is another Wilberg unpublished setting. And it hits on all the usual bullet points that we would expect towards the end. Pray, pay, obey, stay within the light, stay within the walls, and you'll be rewarded. I won't hit on any of the specific points I've got with it because I've hammered on them so much I'm actually tired of it now because the church is predictable. As some people have said in the other areas of the podcast world, it's the same messages that just continually circle around. And at some point, maybe someone will break the cycle and come up with some original ideas of being good Christians. And let's get away from some of the parochial doom and gloom that seems to be a dark cloud over the church these days. It's not doing for the better. People are leaving, kids are leaving, youth are leaving, a lot of people are leaving from around the world. The church will never admit it because then that makes them look like they aren't the true church, and they will never abide by that. So the at the end, the postlude at the organ concludes with "Oh, holy words of truth, holy words of truth and love." I think is the title. I mistyped that here, and that is blissfully the end of General Conference. And hopefully, I'll figure out a way to streamline this and make it a little bit more concise and less of an energy draw on myself and perhaps even you. But I've suffered through all this just for you and to talk about music a little bit. I wanted to spend a whole lot more time doing musical examples and talking about some of the structures of things, but it just becomes so pedantic because we start talking about the same things musically as we do in just the context and the subject matter of the lyrics given within the songs and all the choir pieces and all the hymns. There's nothing new, and there will likely not be anything new until there's a new hymn book, which has me greatly intrigued, and I'll be watching for that as that unfolds. And I may even throw a few shekels back at the church, which they don't deserve from me after all these years. But just because I want to have a piece of hard copied paper of what they're doing in the supposed new hymnal, which sounds like a collection of both regular hymnal and children's stuff all in one resource. I don't know if that's true or not. We'll see. But that and many other subjects, including what will be probably my next big episode, looking at the New Year's Extravaganza from 2008, which first launched me in the podcast world, but it never quite caught legs to go on its own. I just didn't have energy to carry it because, well, there wasn't many resources to poke at church music until the last few years. So now we can make a go of it and look at all these things, and we'll see how angry the church gets at me and chases after me for talking about their material in ways they don't want people talking about it. But until then, please make certain where is it? It's over on this side of the screen. Like and subscribe down below. And yes, you were feeling the spirit of, well, hitting like and subscribe below because we want to keep doing this. And while I don't ask for money, I do like affirmations. Who doesn't? So until next time, this is Sean from Echoes of the Tabernacle, and we'll see you in the next video.